So I want to do a recap here on it. You know, if there's three things that I could tell someone that has not fished a chatterbait much to keep in mind, I would say, you know, probably don't, you know, don't make it too hard. Don't overcomplicate it because this bait is really so simple to use. You know, stick with three basic colors or four. You know, get you a white, get you a dark green pumpkin, black and blue, and then maybe get you a brighter color like a chartreuse or a fire crawl. You know, red color, and try to just stick with the 3/8 and a half. Just don't overcomplicate the bait. Um, you know, like I said, you can change trailers. There's thousands of ways you can rig this thing, but just throwing this thing, you know, in 3/8 or half and those basic colors and paying attention to the conditions you have, you're gonna catch fish on this. Number two, I would say is really, you know, use this bait as a search bait a lot of times. You know, like this is not gonna be like we talked about earlier, having a jig on the deck. Everybody's got a jig on the deck, but you're not gonna go out and practice really a whole lot with a jig. You're gonna use a jig once you've found a group of fish and you wanna slow down and pick them apart. So, you know, this thing, even though I compared it to a jig, it's more of a search tool. And in it being a search tool, it gets a ton of bites. I mean, you know, the Bass Pro Tour, we fish for every fish counts, you know, over the minimum weight, and you just catch a ton of fish on this thing. So, you know, you go out and you're fishing your home body of water, whatever that may be, you know, and you're just looking for an area out there to get bit. This is going to be the bait that you need to be throwing. And I don't really necessarily think that you have to have wind or you have to have colored water. Like this thing's going to get bit in a ton of different situations. So just keep that in mind and let this be the bait that you pick up and that you get comfortable with, that you make your confidence bait, because it will be that without much use, I promise. And then number three, I would just say, you know, make sure that you have the right the right rod, the right reel. The reel doesn't matter as much as the rod and the line. The reel, you could throw an 8 gear ratio and it just depend on how you're retrieving it, it's going to be fine. So just make sure you find a rod that you're happy with. You want it to have some bend, that way a lot of times you get bit on this thing and it's not a thump, you know, it's not a real hard bite. A lot of times it is. A lot of times they'll take the rod out of your hand, but a lot of times you'll just be reeling it and it just all of a sudden you just kind of lose the vibration and it gets mushy. So you want a rod that loads up, you want a rod that's sensitive, but you still want some backbone to it. That way when you get a bite, you can drive this hook home and get them in the boat. And then just make sure, you know, depending on the cover you're fishing, just make sure to use heavier line for heavier cover or lighter line for open water situations, over grass, whatever it may be. But don't get too wild with it. About 14 to 18, maybe sometimes 20, you could say. And that's all you need to know about a chatterbait. Like I said, this is one fish catching machine. And if you get out and put some time in with it, you're going to find that it's one of your confidence baits and you're going to love to throw it. All right, so when you're skipping a chatterbait around trees, under docks, under some floats or boats, whatever it may be, uh, I tend to lean toward the 3/8 more than the half, just because it skips better. And one thing that I will do is I like to use a bigger, bulkier trailer, something that's a little bit fatter and flatter on the sides. And that's just going to help it get that skip, you know, just like a stone that you skip, you know, it's going to be flat and wide. But you want to have a trailer on your chatterbait that's got a little bit more meat to it. It's going to be flat. And that way you can, and I do a roll cast. I kind of get this motion going. And I don't know if you can see it, but I always try to skip it like this. Sometimes I'll flip it and skip it under, but you know, just making sure you have the right trailer for it to skip it under there.